Hello Year 6, I hope you had a good weekend. I managed to go for a long walk, so that was nice. It always feels good to have a bit of exercise. This morning I haven't got Pugwash with me, he's still fast asleep. Chapter 4, The Lion Boy, where we left it, was Aniba and Magdalene, so Charlie's mum and dad, they've been captured. And so let's continue. Around 3 or 4 in the morning, in the real dark, when even the slugs and the night creatures have gone back to sleep, and before the birds have woken, Charlie leapt up with a start. Rats! How much time had he lost? The flat was quiet, his bedroom door was closed. Charlie tipped over to it, locked at least on a latch. Well, that was easy. He got his ID card from his bag and slid it gently into the crack of the door. Jake at the fountain had taught him how to do that years ago. A little twitch of the wrist and bingo! The latch jumped out of its slot and the door eased open. Dark in the grimly hallway. Breathing from the other bedroom, steady, heavy male breathing, heavy dog breathing filling up the gaps. Stay asleep, you big lugs, Charlie urged inside his head. His bag over his shoulder, he crept out across to their flat door. Locked. 2 bolts easily slid and a double lock needing a key. Charlie peered through the dim light and then almost laughed out loud. Here was the key on the hall shelf. Ruffy obviously thought him totally useless. Well, he would show him. He slid sliding through onto the communal landing of the housing tower and let the door shut behind him. Rather than call the noisy lift, he opened the glass door to the stairway and scampered down, 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 flight after flight until he was giddy. He stopped to get his breath and his balance back. His head and his blood were spinning. Outside he could see the cold grey that begins to light the sky before dawn, and the morning star hanging like a distant gold coin against the grey. By the time he got to the bottom and out into the yard, crimson streaks were shooting up the sky, grey was fading out to let through a beautiful clear blue, and a few strands of white cloud blew like flags high, high up. First hurdle crossed, and it was going to be a beautiful day. Charlie lifted his nose, caught the river smell, and started to gallop south, following the sweet, damp smell that would take him to the river and the sea. By the time he got in reach of the Thames riverside, he was starving. In front of him was one of the pleasure banks, which during the afternoon and evening would be bouncing with rides and games and stalls selling fun-filled fluffed sugar and sweet fruit. Now it was silent, the rides wrapped up in canvas against the damp, and the pleasure bank people all still asleep or beginning to fry up their bacon for the new day. The smell tormented Charlie's nose, which actually began to twitch. "Bacon sandwich," he murmured. So he skirted the pleasure banks, feeling rather grown up, because his normal reaction would be, "I want to go on the rides, I want to go," and moved east towards the rising sun. He started along a towpath lined with pretty houseboats. He could hear the people inside yawning and see them popping up out of their painted hatches, red and green, to stretch in the morning air. He kept hurriedly along. He didn't want anyone to remember that they had seen him. Ruffy would be waking up. The humans of whom Petra had spoken might have friends or helpers. Charlie pulled his head in and scurried on like a spider along a skirting board. It was only another half hour or so before he was back on the riversides near where he lived. Ahead of him were the ruins, left over from the times when thousands more people lived here, before they fled the car fumes and treachery of city life for new communities. Along the edges and muddy flats of low tide, he could see the little fishing boats. Better still, he could see a shimmer of heat rising from near the shore end of the fish jetty, and hear the low crackle of a grill, and smell the unmistakable smell of a riverman's breakfast, eel and sparrowfish, by the sniff of it. Charlie leapt over the little wall from the towpath to the fisher guy's territory, landed in a shallow flat of sultry mud, and ambled over to the fish jetty. He recognised the fisher guy at the grill. It was Mr. Ubsworth, Steve's dad. Mr. Ubsworth was a lot like a fish himself, long and greyish pink and wet looking. Behind him was a large canvas with a small mountain of slivery silvery fish, last night's catch. Mr. Ubsworth had a big old eel up on the table and was cleaning it for grilling. He scraped the silver skin and crimson innards off the table into an old sack. A skinny brown cat was picking round it. Mr. Upsworth looked up and saw him, too late to be discreet. Oh well. Morning, Mr. Upsworth, sir, called Charlie cheerfully. Hey, Charlie boy, returned Mr. Upsworth. Then, early, he commented. Charlie agreed. Hungry? Mr. Upsworth wondered. Charlie agreed again. 2 minutes later, he was wrapping his mouth around a toasted eel sandwich, buttered up with lemon and pepper, and had never tasted anything better. The eels here were huge, 8 feet long, some of them. Their meat was more like chicken than fish. Some of the school kids said snake tasted like eel, but Charlie had never eaten snake. Africans don't eat them, his father had said, like the English don't eat snails. So Charlie's dad ate snails, and his mum ate snake, and Charlie didn't eat either. Sometimes he wished he ate both. But when it came to it, he didn't actually fancy either. Give him a good eel sandwich any day. Mr. Upsworth had a cup of tea ready too. Where you off to, boy? Said Mr. Upsworth. Listen, said Charlie, lying automatically. Aye, said Mr. Upsworth. He carried on cleaning, pausing only to take Charlie's Durham until a group of other fisher guys came up from the water's edge. Be going along then, said Charlie. Thank you. Aye, said Mr. Upsworth. Raffy did wake up. Troy was whining and slavering at him, so he pulled his head out from under his pillow. He listened out for Charlie. Hearing nothing, he leapt lightly from his bed and looked into Charlie's room. First, he was just surprised. It hadn't occurred to him that Charlie would have the guts to run off. Then he was angry. His lips went thin and his face grew hard. Turning from the empty bed, he kicked the dog. Could have biddy woken, couldn't you? He snarled. Barked or something, or was that too hard for you? Troy yelped and skittered across the floor in a way that suggested he had been kicked often before. Raffy grabbed his phone and without even thinking started punching in a number so he could shout at someone. When he realised that he couldn't, if he told his people that he had let the boy escape, he'd be humiliated. This could not get out. The chief executive must not hear about this. Even when you got everything right, it was tough enough being a teenage criminal, getting people to believe you could do stuff, making them have faith in your abilities. But mistakes were out of the question. His reputation was at stake here. Nobody was going to have the chance to call him a stupid kid. That damn Charlie. He thought fast. Then he rang all the contacts he had for friends of Aniba and Magdalene. None of them had heard from Charlie. They all thought he'd gone off on a sudden trip with his parents to start their new job in a toxic post-flood area where communities were very bad, but they'd be in touch in due course and not to worry. The reason they thought this was because Raffy had spent the previous afternoon on Magdalene's computer telling them so, by email. Raffy had done his job too well. He couldn't send Sid and Winner after Charlie because they had their hands full on the submarine. Oh, they're in the submarine. So what should he call the police? He laughed and then thought, well, why not? But he didn't. Raffy knew which side he was on. So Troy said, shall we go for a run? The kid couldn't get far. Troy would track him down, the little rat. As Charlie shouldered his bag after breakfast, he caught sight of a flick of fairy brown tail out the corner of his eye. He looked round. Again, a brown flick. It was beckoning to him, directing him back onto the towpath. With a gesture of thanks to Mr. Upsworth, Charlie jumped over the little wall again and saw him there in front of him as he landed a very proud-looking cat's bottom, tail waving erect above it as it sauntered away from him. Of course, he followed it. Behind a bush out of sight, the cat turned round. Charlie didn't recognise it. So, how's you getting down river? It said briefly. Charlie was used to the quick, brisk way these cats talked, but anyone else might think that they were a bit rude. Jump a ship, I thought, said Charlie. Funny a time of day for stowing away, said the cat. Follow me. Charlie followed, back along the towpath for a mile or so further east. Then, when they reached the marina, across the larger pool where the pleasure boats lived. Again, Charlie felt a pang of yearning to go out on a pleasure boat, with the bunting flapping and the sun shining, and they could drink cherry sherbet and dive off the stern into the darker, smaller water yard of the River Place. Nearest the entrance was a River Police launch, polished wooden deck, extra large engine, River Police coat of arms on the spike, and a policeman fast asleep in the cockpit. Go in gently, whispered the cat. Curl up in the bows and on the anchor chain. He'll be leaving for Greenwich soon on his patrol, as soon as he wakes up. He was drunk last night. Here the cat took on a look of disdain, and he'll be in a rush where he sees late. At Greenwich he'll tie up and go to the pub. Soon he's gone off, you'll go and catch yourself a sea ship that headed across the channel, France. France? He exclaimed. France? He didn't know what he thought about that. France? Get on, said the cat impatiently, and it ain't got all day. Charlie would have to climb right over the policeman to get to the bows. He had to step over him without waking him, then sneak down the companionway into the boat and along to the end. It was all right for cats. They could leap so lightly, it was almost like flying. But a boy makes a thump when he lands. Charlie edged himself slowly and carefully along the railings that lined the deck, bypassing the policeman, and was able to sneak past and swiftly down the stairs. "Whust!" hissed the cat, and Charlie heard a sort of rumbling, snoring noise, a rumbling, creaking, yawning, groaning sound that could only be the noise of a hungover policeman slightly disturbed by something and waking up in the open air on a boat and feeling stiff and stupid and cold and uncomfortable. Charlie hilted into the bows, folded himself up in the dark as tight as he could, and lay still. He could smell engine oil, canvas, turpentine. The anchor chain was cold and hard, coiled beneath him. Never mind. The policeman, just as the cat had predicted, was already rubbing his head, cursing and trying to start up the engine. As soon as the noise of the engine was covering any noise he might make, Charlie positioned himself so that he could peer out of the anchor's chain holes and settled in to think about Riffy. He hadn't caught up with him. He really hadn't yet. He wondered for a moment how much effort Riffy would put into pursuing him. He couldn't imagine why Riffy would bother with him, but then he couldn't imagine how Riffy could be involved with his parents' disappearance. Riffy was just a kid in the neighbourhood, older and cool, but still just a kid. Kind of. He was still a teenager. But he could quite see that someone like Riffy would be annoyed at a younger kid like Charlie getting the better of him. He didn't like the idea of an angry Riffy. Then he smiled. "But I'm angry too," he whispered. Several miles downstream, a neighbour was saying, "Who are you and where are you taking us?" It's the 17th time he had said it, and for the 17th time Winner was sneering and smiling nastily and replying, "You don't want to know, sunshine, you don't want to know." And a neighbour's heart constricted. His child, his wife, his child. But he wanted to know very much. When they knew, they'd be able to work out what to do about it. He sat back and closed his eyes and thought. If he thought enough, he might be able to work it out for himself. End of chapter 4. Chapter 5 tomorrow. Hope you enjoyed that.